Well, folks, the focus for this week's news update is going to be the patch 11.15 PTR, where we've had an update about a returning feature from BFA patch 8.3 that pretty much everyone who played back then will remember fondly. And no, that's not the returning Horrific Visions event, though this update does have some potentially worrying implications for the return of Visions. There's also been a bit of a drama over in Classic Hardcore, which I think could potentially have some impact in how Blizzard deals with stability issues in all versions of World of Warcraft in the future. So let's dive in. Back in BFA patch 8.3, Horrific Visions was one of those features that some players absolutely loved, while many other players loathed in equal measure. For those of you who missed out on them, Horrific Visions was the first ever content to support both solo and 1 to 5 man group play, and at the hardest difficulties would award mythic raid gear. Yes, all the way back in BFA, it was for a time possible to get the best gear in the game through solo play. The Visions alternate weekly between Stormwind and Orgrimmar and consist of a final boss area whose defeat marks the successful end of the encounter, surrounded by 4 optional zones which you could clear to get additional reward, along with a mechanic where a sanity bar would be depleted both over time and as you got hit by enemy mechanics. If this bar ran out of sanity before you defeated the boss, you would fail the run. This enabled you to effectively choose the level of difficulty for a run, and if a full clear was not hard enough, you could also collect up to 5 horrific masks that, when you used them in a run, reduced your sanity bar and added additional affixes, allowing you to further push that difficulty. Initially, we start out far too weak to be able to do much more than simply to run to the final boss, kill it, and then get out. But over time we were able to rank up both a legendary cloak and a tech tree, which would grant us more and more sanity, reduce sanity drain, and other useful buffs to enable us to go deeper and deeper into those visions. This particular system had incredible potential to offer challenging gameplay along with a fun progression curve, but that potential was for many players completely ruined by the 8.3 legendary cloak, which was an essential part of your character's progress in every bit of World of Warcraft content, but which required you to run Visions over a period of 2 months to fully upgrade. To make matters worse, you could only access Visions by farming a limited number of vessels, which were essentially keys from open world content. Those vessels were so limited that if you failed more than 2 or 3 Visions over the 2-month period, you'd be stuck permanently behind, potentially for several weeks. The end result of all of this was that it created a feeling of being forced to play the game in exactly the way the developers wanted us to play, which basically robbed us of any agency in our decision making. On top of that, the limited access to Visions put massive pressure in every run, and that pressure combined with the gameplay mechanics to make the whole thing feel extremely oppressive. Blizzard did eventually introduce a new currency along with a vendor that allowed us to earn an unlimited number of those vessels from doing any of the content in World of Warcraft that we wanted to do, and that did remove a lot of pressure, allowing the content to shine. But that only came after most people had already fully ranked up the cloaks, meaning that while the experience was significantly improved, it remained forever tainted by that terrible initial experience. And like I suspect many of the players at the time, I just really don't have good memories of the feature. The good news is that the new version of Horrific Visions does have unlimited access right from the start, completely removing one of those major issues. And up until this week's PTR update, it very much looked like the content would be much more of an optional thing that we could just do for cosmetics. Along with those Horrific Visions, we're also seeing the return of something else from patch 8.3, which is some of the corruption effect. These were incredibly powerful effects that ranking up our cloak would allow us to add more and more of to our gear items. As well as some of the effects being a ton of fun, this gave us an incredible power spike that allowed many players to progress into much harder content than was the norm for them. My own raid team at the time, who normally found getting ahead of the curve a bit of a challenge, even made it to 5 out of 10 Mythic in Nyalotha. This time around, the corruption effects are returning as a Helm enchant. After unlocking the Horrific Visions, you'll get a quest that on completion will allow you to choose from up to 6 of the effect, including favourites like Twilight Devastation, Infinite Stars or Gushing Moons. This new enchant will only be available for the remainder of Season 2, being automatically disabled when Season 3 starts. Unfortunately, completing this quest is going to require that you will collect 500 of the new currency from Horrific Visions, along with 8 other items that will drop from the various mini-bosses. While the corruption effects are not as potent as the BFA versions, as it is going on our Helm, which doesn't have any other enchant options, this is of course going to make obtaining that enchant feel mandatory for pretty much anyone who wants to do Heroic Raiding, Mythic Plus or rated PvP. In other words, as with patch 8.3, doing at least some Horrific Visions are going to be pretty much compulsory for large parts of the player base. Up until this update, patch 11.1.5 had been looking like it was going to offer a mini buffet of different types of optional content that were aimed at different types of player, meaning that you'd be able to pick whatever you fancy doing for a bunch of catch-up gear and cosmetic rewards. This still does seem to be the case for the Nightfall content and for dynamic duels, but even if Horrific Visions are not for you, you are still going to be doing at least some. Now, to be clear, this isn't going to be another BFA 8.3 style 2 month long time gated grind. Based on my own testing, it will probably take most people around 4 to 8 runs to complete the quest, which is something that you should be able to knock out in maybe a couple of hours. That's certainly not a season ruining experience. Honestly, I suspect that most people will just get the quest done and then move on, but it is still going to feel like a bit of a chore to obtain what is, at the end of the day, thanks to the developer's plan to just disable it at the end of the season, an example of bad borrowed power. If Horrific Visions were a brand new feature that we'd not seen before, this would probably have been perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with giving us a nudge to try out something new. But for players who did the Horrific Vision gameplay loop back in the day, this I think will bring back memories of the last time that we were forced to do Visions. And those are memories that I suspect neither the players who played through that time nor the developers really want to bring back. Humans have a strong tendency to overemphasize our bad memories over the good ones, something that can easily permanently taint what would otherwise be a perfectly good experience. And this creates a very real risk that the return of Visions is in the process of being fumbled by the WoW developers. Blizzard do have a short window of opportunity through feedback or perhaps their own playtesting to realise this and find a better alternative to acquiring these enchants that will more reliably set Horrific Visions up for success, and I do hope that they take that opportunity. Staying on the PTR, and this week's build also removed a feature which, while not included in the patch announcement, had been present in previous builds, and that's the Winds of Mysterious Fortune buff, which offered major XP and reputation boosts for players. This buff is now gone from both the patch splash screen and the characters on the PTR, which makes me suspect that Blizzard may have decided to not go ahead with it, or maybe to just postpone it perhaps to the 11.17 patch. Without an official update, it is hard to say for sure, but with the Undermine cartel reputations currently looking like they will require as much as 20 weeks to complete, this is a buff that would have been very welcome, and I for one will be pretty disappointed if it does not make it to live in patch 11.15. If we do get some more information on whether or not this is going to be a thing, I will be sure to update you. So do hit that subscribe button if you don't want to miss it. And finally, for the PTR updates, we have yet another hint about the potential launch date. This week in a blue post, Blizzard have announced that the ability to rename guilds is going to be removed from the in-game shop on April the 22nd. After that time, you will instead be able to rename your guild for 200,000 gold in-game. The ability to rename guilds for gold is currently being testing on the 11.15 PTR, and to me that would strongly suggest that Blizzard are expecting to launch the patch on the 22nd of April, a date that has previously been speculated as one of the potential launch dates. Moving over now to the live game, and if you have been raiding regularly, then this week you will earn the skip for the liberation of Undermine. Earning the skip this time around is much easier than it has been in the past. After you hit Renown 5 with the new Glacial Rewards Club, just head over to just inside the raid entrance to pick up a quest to defeat Mugsy. If you've not already completed the raid this week but are up to date with Renown from previous week, this quest should appear before you reach Mugsy, meaning that it will be well worth heading back to the entrance to collect it before you take him on. The quest only unlocks the skip for the difficulty that you're currently playing, but you will be able to pick the quests for the other difficulties the next time you head into the raid. Next week we'll see the start of April and a brand new trading post, which means it's also time for the traditional preview of the post from the developers. The new post theme is going to be called Fair and Bright, but the focus seems to be on the Darkmoon Fair aesthetic, which doesn't really scream bright at me. For mount collectors, we're getting the Violet Darkmoon Charger, a cool looking horse mount which combines the living horse model with the undead horse armor look, and I personally think this looks really cool and unique. And the monthly reward for completing the Trader's Tender Bar is the Topsy Turvy mask set, which I suspect will be pretty popular with role players. Now, for those of you who are over in the US and who have been considering attending the Boston leg of the Warcraft Anniversary Tour, the first wave of tickets was released this week, along with a few more details of the venue, which is going to be the Royal Boston on May the 10th, starting at 7 PM Eastern Time. Unlike some of the other events, we don't currently have any more details such as who will be attending from the World of Warcraft team or even the entertainment to expect. So this one is currently remaining a little bit mysterious. The first wave of tickets has unfortunately sold out, but it's very likely that it will follow the pattern of the other events by releasing at least a couple of other waves. So if you did miss out on those tickets, it will be worth starting to keep an eye on the event page so that you don't miss out. I'll put a link down below. And finally, for this week's update, while I mainly cover modern retail World of Warcraft news here, there has been some drama over in Hardcore Classic that, as well as catching my attention, may in the long term have some impact on retail. For those of you who don't follow Classic content creation, the streamer Sodapoppin created a content creator only guild called Only Fangs on Hardcore Classic, who have been dominating Twitch viewership as they battle to survive all the way through to Blackwing Lair on a server where death means the end of your character forever. As I'm sure many of my North American viewers will already be aware, the North American game servers have been experiencing dynamic denial of service attacks, which have caused a lot of server instability and crashes. And last weekend, one of those attacks hit Only Fangs during a BWL raid. The end result being that a significant majority of the raiders lost their characters through no fault of their own. Blizzard have always, ever since Diablo 2, taken a very hard line with hardcore game modes, and that game crashes and disconnects do not offer any exemption to the hardcore permadeath rule, meaning that this looked very much like the end for Only Fangs. However, in a bit of a surprise move, Blizzard have announced that the characters who are affected by this event will be restored, and not just for Only Fangs, but for many others that were caught up in the crash. This, of course, has caused a bit of a reaction from the community, including a lot of complaints of special treatment. I'm personally in no doubt that if this had happened to any other guild, Blizzard's response would have been very different. But that does not mean that this was the wrong thing to do. Blizzard obviously cannot reverse every single disconnect or crash, not least because if they did, people would just find ways to exploit it. But major server crashes and disconnects is something that Blizzard can automatically detect and take steps to defend the affected players. Obviously, the fact that it took this happening in front of a large public audience to get Blizzard to take actions to improve the overall experience of the players does not reflect well on their attitude to that player experience. But this was not down to the content creators in OnlyFang, who deserve nothing more than a thanks for bringing this issue, even if unintentionally, to the fore. My hope is that this event will prompt Blizzard to take a hard look at their server and network technology, both to look for ways to better defend against DDoS attacks, but also to reduce the impact of server instability in players of all versions of the game. And if that does happen, it will mean that we will all have something to thank the members of OnlyFangs for. And that's it for this week's news update. Do you think that Blizzard was right to restore the hardcore characters, or should they have held their ground? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found this week's update interesting, useful, informative, or even just a bit annoying, then do let me know by hitting the thumbs up button. And if you want to support my channel and enable me to keep doing these updates, then do remember to subscribe right now before you forget. I've a bunch of guides, news, reviews, and opinions in the pipeline that you will not want to miss. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.